Well, welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. It's been one of those things where obviously I've seen you pop up online for years now and trying to have an excuse to chat. So it's always good to have a waffle about rivers with anyone, really, especially yourself.
It's always good to meet your Twitter friends, isn't it?
Yeah, it's part of me thinks it's a bit sad, but in another way, it's good. It's good that people can join each other online and share interests that ordinarily wouldn't. So it's not sad, is it? We should embrace it. We should all embrace
Abs-
that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. I think it's great to do, be out doing what you do, but be connected to a bigger community whilst you're doing it.
Definitely. Why Twitter's a thing anyway, before it implodes. If you keep watching everything that goes on, the world's ending, Twitter's going to explode. So there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Twitter. What we are here is to talk about Chalkstreams. So many people might have heard of a Chalkstream, may not have heard of a Chalkstream. So we'll start at the very basics. What is a Chalkstream?
Good question. It's a good question. Chalk streams. I mean, in its the kind of most basic definition, a chalk stream is a river which receives most of its flow from a chalk aquifer and has characteristics kind of defined by the chalk aquifer from which it flows. But I don't think that necessarily explains it particularly well. And really, to understand what chalk streams are, you've got to kind of get your head around the history of them a bit, because they are unusual. Then their history is where they're really different from other rivers. They're kind of a happy accident of both nature and people. I mean, obviously, first of all, the geology is what defines them the most. So they're chalk rivers, and next thing you'll hear is how they're globally rare, and that we have virtually all of them in England, with a few in France and Denmark. But why is that? And chalk has formed in lots of places over kind of the geological periods which it was forming. So why have we got chalk streams here and not really anywhere else? And it all comes down to a bit of a fluke of geology and glaciation and topography and all kinds of things that mean that we've ended up with this exposed chalk in some places, or chalk not far from the surface, that hasn't been eroded away. That's actually still here a long time after it's formed. So
It's a perfect cocktail, then, isn't it? A perfect cocktail of things all coming together.
Yeah, it's an unusual circumstance that's landed us with them. And what's then unusual is what's happened since as well. So having a big lump of chalk doesn't necessarily mean you get chalk streams. What happened with us is that chalk formed during a interglacial period where the world was really hot, and we had a shallow sea, and it was formed by calcareous algae sort of dropping to the bed. And then during the last ice age, the glaciers didn't quite come down all the way to the sort of bottom end of England. So they didn't, the chalk wasn't kind of destroyed necessarily by the glaciers, but it did freeze. And then the meltwater coming off those glaciers going over frozen chalk, well, then that chalk eroded as if it was rock and formed all the kind of chalk downs and valleys that we've got. And then after that, when the world warms up again, we're left with this suddenly porous again rock, and water's coming out of it and kind of following these different valleys that were previously formed when it was frozen. And also that kind of in that glacial period, you had a lot of breaking up of flint that was in the chalk, because flint is essentially if you imagine you've got a shallow sea and all the algae on the surface is dropping down in kind of marine snow and sort of starts to form that chalk. Then on the bed are sponges, and there are worms and things sort of burrowing through it, and there's a lot of silica in their bodies. And when they die, that kind of silica dissolves into the water, fills all these little cavities and burrows and things, and eventually that actually over time is what forms the flint, and then that flint is broken up by the sort of glacial action and ends up kind of almost tumbling down into these valleys, and we're left with this system where we've got these kind of flint beds with water flowing over them that's coming out of the chalk rock. And that's kind of half the story. That gets us, that's the first happy accident that gets us almost to Chalkstreams. They then got a period where you've got lots of little kind of braided marshes flowing through these valleys with trees and beavers and wild grazing animals and lots of different plants and salmonids spawning, and it's all constantly changing and moving around. It's a very, very dynamic system. And then that's when people arrive on the scene and we start fording and draining land. And then in the medieval kind of period, we get the water meadow systems in southern England, which was all about getting that chalk stream water, which is quite stable in temperature even through the winter, get it flowing across the land to kind of keep the land warm during the winter, early crop of grass, higher yield of wool or meat or whatever you're grazing on it, and then water mills and things. So it's constantly being played around with. And the thing with chalk streams compared to other rivers is that you can play around with them very, very easily because they're very benign, very low gradient, very gentle systems. So when we bugger about with them, they stay buggered, basically.
Well, I'm glad you sort of brought that up because I was going to talk to you about this because I suppose, do you fish? Are you an angler, Mike? Do you fish as well?
Yeah, for my sins, I try
okay.
anyway.
Okay, so when a lot of fishermen in particular think about chalk streams, they've got this idea of very neatly cut banks and almost a straight river, which is gin clear, but it's not, I suppose, how a chalk stream would look, say, 1,000 years ago. And like the idea of a chalk stream now, although it's a very nice, pretty picture, it's not actually how a chalk stream should look, which might upset some anglers, but it's a lovely idea, but it's not how they should look.
It's a lovely idea.
Is that a fair point? Or
it's a very fair point. And actually, It's not about what they were like thousands of years ago. They didn't look like that 150 years ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's the final step. So gone from being this kind of braided dynamic system into something much more ordered and structured. And actually, almost every chalk stream you see has been cut to that shape. It's not, there isn't really a natural chalk stream you can point to. But then obviously, we acquire heavy plant machinery, diggers and dredgers and things. And you've got the Dig for Victory campaigns during the war and the Fortress Britain sort of mindset. And then post-war, the Land Drainage Act and Common Agricultural Policy. And it's all about getting, unproductive land, so nasty, wet floodplains into good productive farmland. So we went along and we dredged them to pieces, and we dredged all our rivers to pieces all over the place. But a lot of those rivers didn't tolerate it, and they very quickly put themselves back because they've got lots of sediment coming down them, lots of energy, big spate flows. Chalk streams, gentle little things, very, very stable systems. They've just stayed that way. And a lot of those kind of canal-like, very straight, very neat, ordered bits of chalk stream, they're generally really terrible habitat, and they've stayed that way. And a lot of the work that sort of me and my colleagues do now is trying to undo that damage because the chalk streams can't do it themselves.
So why is that bad then? Why is it bad to have a straight piece of river?
Well, it's if it's straight, it's uniform. So, and if it's uniform, it's all one type of habitat. So, biodiversity follows on from physical diversity. It's niches for species. So you've got to have lots of little places for things to live. If you look at freshwater invertebrates, if you've ever done a river dipping or river fly sampling, you'll get the kind of flattened mayfly species that are kind of, you can look at them, they're built to hold on to stones in faster flows, and then you get other ones that are more adapted to burrowing in sort of silty conditions. And that goes all the way across the entire ecosystem. Things, different creatures and plants adapted to different environments. And if you've got an environment that's all the same, then you're going to have a really limited number of species occupying that, and ultimately you don't have a fully functioning ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you were mentioning there that yourself, and this is with Wessex Rivers Trust, right? You're trying to change that, are you, where you can?
Yeah. So I mean, I've been, funnily enough, it's kind of an oddity, I suppose, where river restoration's the only full-time job I've ever had. It's sort of been doing it. It's all I've ever done, really. And it's a lot of that is focused on Chalkstreams because I mean, there is a lot of river restoration done all over the country, but in a lot of cases, you're in a position where you can use natural processes more easily to help rivers restore themselves. And the Chalkstreams quite often need more of a violent intervention to get them back into the condition they are, because those natural processes are just so suppressed because we have low gradients, low sediment loads. They're sort of lovely, gentle little things that they're too polite to to make the sort of fuss they need to sort themselves out.
What's the reception like if you're approaching? I imagine, nature is perhaps a little bit easier. I don't know if our angling clubs like, oh yeah, this sounds great, let's get lots of different diverse habitats, or are they more like, we've had it this way for 50 years and we'll keep it this way for the next 50? Like, what's it like when you approach these kind of owners?
It varies.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Funny enough, clubs tend to be easier
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
than commercial fisheries. So that's
okay.
So the great example I always have is you've got the Avon and the Test. The two biggest Chalkstreams. If you count the Test and Itchen together, you might as well. The two of the biggest Chalkstreams side by side. The Avon's 10 years ahead of the Test and Itchen. It has been for a long time in terms of attitudes, in terms of accepting that improving nature will ultimately result in a river that looks after your needs better. And a lot of that comes down to the economics of it. There's much more of the Avon is clubs and syndicates, and much more of the Test is commercial fishery, where people paying to fish, rather than a annual membership, they're paying per day.
Yeah.
And in many cases paying more per day than most people pay per year. So so we do end up in some places where actually maintaining the river in a pretty awful state, which is not great for its ecology, does nonetheless keep it in a position where it holds lots of large farmed fish, and that's good business.
And
that's, I mean, I'm being a bit simplistic and negative about it. Generally, attitudes, even in those the more economically lucrative parts of the Chalkstreams, are changing, and we're certainly finding that a lot of the river keepers that actually look after the river, we're seeing quite a big shift compared to a generation ago. I think you've got a lot of people now. They've gone through Sparshot College or other agricultural colleges, and they know their ecology. They're there to look after the river, and they've had more kind of formal training, rather than just learning from the keeper before them, who learned from the keeper before them. So that's been a real breath of fresh air, and I think we're starting to see that with anglers and owners. And of course, nowadays, I think the threats to our Chalkstreams are so much more severe and so much more obvious that people are much more accepting of the argument that we need to do something to buffer ourselves from the impacts to come, as well as the impacts we're facing now. and that if you've got this kind of uniform canal of a river, it's incredibly vulnerable to spikes in water quality, to drought, to heat waves, floods, all of it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because, I was going to come on to some of the threats that they face, because it's weird, isn't it, that the narrative that's been spun for the last sort of 30 years is our rivers have never been healthier and they're looking great. And I noticed that people have gone very quiet on that now. No one's really, or not many people are saying that, because we're slowly going down the other way, which is so saddening to see, really, isn't it? And it's not one problem, is it? It's just a multitude of, as you say, spikes hitting these rivers and kind of putting them down on their knees, really, isn't it?
It is, and I think, I mean, I think that we've had a great kind of awakening to the problems that our rivers face. They're not new problems.
No.
It's this. I think that there's suddenly a lot of talk about sewage pollution. Well, our sewage system's been broken since it was built. If you look at things like combined sewer overflows, that's a system that's designed to pollute. It's built that way. The good news is that people know about it more now. Our agricultural problems, we're probably, in terms of what we're putting on our fields nowadays, chemically, we probably are in a better place. But you've got a legacy in lots of cases of, again with the Chalkstreams, you've got this sort of big slug of phosphate and working its way through the chalk from fertilization of the land in the 60s and 70s, and then that's the kind of context that these spikes in pollution from spilling treatment works, and just a general increase in levels of phosphate, because there's just that many more people living in these catchments, flushing their toilets, washing their clothes, flushing. It's that much more pressure. And I think from your podcast with Ash, he pointed out that treated effluent isn't necessarily pollution free. That's kind of baseline that we've got coming through, and there isn't an awful lot of phosphate stripping, and chalk streams are particularly vulnerable to excess nutrients because they are so clear and so productive anyway. Chalk streams, one of the reasons they're so special is they have the highest abundance and diversity of river plants of any other type of river we've got in the country, and that's because they are these amazing crystal clear rivers, which means there's lots of sunlight getting through, lots of photosynthesis. They're already quite mineral rich and productive, and because they're quite gentle and stuff's not getting washed out every time there's a heavy rain, it's this amazing kind of growing system, and as a result you elevate the levels of nutrients in it and the whole thing goes crazy.
So you mentioned those phosphates that sink into the chalk from the 60s and what is that there then, or is there a way to get rid of that, or is it just sort of the damage has been done? Or is it not as big a problem? Like, would you just sort of crack on, or is it an issue?
I mean, it is an issue.
Okay.
It's an issue that is not all that well understood. There are a few academics you can speak to at it's probably Southampton, Bournemouth, maybe Exeter. That know a lot about this stuff, but being academics, they'll almost certainly tell you that what we need is further research.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
but it's But yeah, definitely, we've definitely got some legacy
Yeah. Okay.
nutrient problems, and that's the backdrop. And if we are reducing the amount of phosphate that's going onto our land, eventually that works its way through. But how long that's going to take, no idea.
Yeah, fair enough. And you mentioned abstraction there, which is something that's a big threat to chalk streams, and particularly, this year, with one of the warmest years on record with the drought that we've had. I mean, some of these chalk streams literally have dried up, haven't they?
Yeah. Some of the upper reaches. I mean, there's lots of chalk headwaters are winterborns anyway, so they naturally only flow in the winter when the springs break, and they naturally dry up. And actually, the entire ecology is adapted to that. But what we've started to see this year is the what should be perennially flowing chalk stream starting to dry up as well, and that's alarming. And obviously, it's very bad for the things that were previously living in those reaches, and it makes for quite nice television, I suppose. You can point a camera at it and say, look, there's no river here, but actually the impacts go all the way down. And that when you get low flows in a chalk stream, it's what you've got is a change within a system that's not very well adapted to change. The chalk streams being these quite stable flowing systems, big spate flows and really low flows is something that they're not particularly well adapted to. And what we'll see is that the plant communities, even in the lower reaches of these rivers where there's still water coming through, start to change. You'll see the species change from being things like ranunculus that need relatively strong flowing water. That will kind of give way to ribbon weeds, sort of like unbranched spur reed, mare's tail, these kind of more slow, sluggish sort of condition plants. And that change doesn't necessarily flip back when the flows return. It will take quite some time for sort of stuff to adapt again. And the danger we've got is that if we get another low flow year before the river's kind of changed back to what it should be, then that change has been exacerbated. And we're always worrying about ranunculus on the chalk streams. It's the powerhouse of the whole ecosystem. It's an incredible plant, and if you ever run your hands through a strand of ranunculus, especially in a chalk stream, and look at it, it'll be absolutely crawling with invertebrates.
Yeah.
And those invertebrates are actually cleaning the water for us. They're cleaning the water for us, and actually their droppings are then falling to the riverbed and being transformed into fertilizer for other plants by kind of bacterial action. And it's all happening on the ranunculus essentially. And when you start losing it and getting other species come in, not those species don't have their own benefits, but you're losing one of the most kind of potent parts of the ecosystem. And it's alarming how much we seem to be seeing, even on the really big chalk streams now, that the plant communities are changing and not changing back.
Or you can eat buffet for the fish as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So much stuff in there for them to go for. And we mentioned earlier about where you find chalk streams. So the majority of them are in southern England, but they go, I think I'm right in saying they go all the way to Yorkshire, don't they? There's some in York. There's one or two in Yorkshire.
Yeah, the chalk is you've got it from East Dorset all the way across the south coast into Kent, but then you've also got a band that goes kind of diagonally up the country into East Anglia, and then up the eastern side of England up to the Yorkshire wolds.
That's right. I keep meaning to, because I guess that's marginally closer to me, but I mean, predominantly the work I've done has been on a lot of the kind of bits in your area, really, like the Test, the Itchen, some of the Dorset rivers and whatnot. And my wife's from Kent, actually. I should really go visit some of the chalk streams there, because obviously most people know the White Cliffs of Dover. Well, that's why it's there, because it's chalk. So the chalk streams, you've got, I think the Dower is one of the famous ones, and
Yeah, the Darrow's an interesting river.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Yeah, there's a great little community of people that do conservation work on the Dower. There's some wild beavers down there, actually, not many people know about.
Is that right?
Yeah,
because we did well. It was released yesterday. I don't know when this episode will be released exactly in order, but we talked about beavers, and I know beavers and chalk streams. There is certainly, from some of these angling clubs, are a little bit worried about beavers on chalk streams as opposed to some of the bigger rivers. I don't know what your take is on that. Are they going to be an issue on the smaller rivers, or is it sort of time will tell, or don't worry about it?
I mean, time will tell.
Yeah,
They're on the the outskirts of the chalk right now. They'll be on the chalk.
Didn't you
pretty
see
soon.
one? Was it you? Did you post a picture of one somewhere?
On the Stour, which is
that's it.
Yeah, but the Stour is a funny little river, and it's not a chalk stream, but it's sort of wedged in between chalk streams.
Okay.
So they've managed to find their way into our kind of catchment on the only bit that's not chalk. But they're tributaries are going to the Stour that are chalk streams.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't think it will be too many years before we see beavers on the chalk streams. And I think a lot of people's concerns are, people worry about the impact they're going to have on sort of main river chalk stream, where they're not really going to be building dams anyway, so I'm not particularly too concerned about it.
No,
I mean, certainly there is potential for the impacts of beavers to be more pronounced on low energy, low gradient systems. If you've got a very steep river and you build a dam on it, the impounding effect of that dam, only goes so far upstream before it's drowned out by the slope of the riverbed. If you've got a very, very gentle slope, then actually even a small impoundment can back the river up a very long way.
Right.
And them being already quite slow flowing, it doesn't take much to cause a lot of siltation. And where we've seen beaver dams, for example, down on the River Otter, where you get a spate flow come through and you get regular breaches of them, then you get all these little kind of rivulets forming and different kind of potential routes for fish passage. How well that's going to happen on chalk streams, I don't know. That you don't get those kind of high energy flows. The counter to that argument is that on a lot of the chalk streams, you've got people whose job it is to micromanage the height of the reeds. So you'd think that they could cope with poking around and managing, some of the impacts of beavers. There aren't many rivers in the country that have full-time staff, but there's an awful lot of them on the chalk streams. So you'd think that actually with the right kind of guidance and support, and that's probably the biggest if, is actually what kind of help there is for people that are worrying about the impacts of beavers, to what they can do about it. But I think that probably we'll find that there'll be a bit of a learning curve, and eventually we'll end up in a situation where it's managed. There will be conflicts, there will be problems, but if you can manage those, then it should tip the balance into benefits, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Mike. I think that's probably the very best way to put it. And it's not going to be perfect to start with, but people just got to learn to live with them and hopefully appreciate the benefits that beavers will bring to a lot of these habitats as well. And one of my pet hates, I don't know how badly chalk streams are affected by this. You'll know this better than me, but is weirs on river. I mean, certainly my local Trent has got some horrific weirs, and if I could just shove a stick of dynamite in every one of them and blow it up, I'd do it today. I can't stand weirs, and particularly because where I live, a lot of it is barbel fishermen. They love it. They love a good weir, and I'm just like, oh, they're fucking horrible things.
They're the devil's work.
They are the devil's work, and it's just like, I appreciate, you might catch a couple more barbel, but that's only because the barbel want to go upstream and they can't bloody get up there. I mean, they're just one of the worst things. I think they're a bit of an unslung problem. I mean, pollution's very kind of not glitzy, but you can understand that. And I know obviously a lot of anglers don't like predation in a certain way, but weirs are such a huge problem for fish migration, and people just don't quite grasp it. But how are they on chalk streams? Does chalk streams get affected by weirs?
Yeah. We do a lot of kind of weir removal
Yeah, good.
projects. There's an awful lot of so yes, you have weirs on the chalk streams. You also have a lot of old sluices, or
Yes, yeah.
hatches as they call them in Hampshire. Which would have been linked to either mills or like the old water meadow systems. So all these gates and micromanaging again of water levels in different parts of the river, and a lot of that carried on from the milling and water meadow system into basically fishery management, and backing the water up in the summer and flushing it through, and actually it's in a lot of places it's because they do annual weed cuts on the chalk streams. Sometimes they'll deliberately back the water up, cut the weed, then you open the sluice and flush it all down to whoever's downstream. You then have to deal with it. So they've been kind of part of the chalk stream landscape for a very long time, both weirs and sluices. And I think generally these days people are more accepting of their removal. We do have a few situations where, for some bizarre reason, there are things like adjacent wetlands that are triple SIs that only exist because of a weir on the river.
Oh, okay.
And that becomes a real challenge. So there's all kinds of that sort of stuff going on the chalk streams. You've got to remember that it's an incredibly artificial landscape, and when we're trying to sort of bring them back to being more natural and more naturally functioning, and looking at things like removing weirs, there are sometimes all kinds of unintended consequences that you've got to kind of wrap your head around.
Yeah. You get some of them are listed, aren't they, as well? Like people are like, oh, it's been there since blah de blah, so we've got to keep that piece of stone there. And
there's heritage, and there's and people like them, and in some cases they've created wild swimming spots that the locals like, or in fact in more recent years, particularly sort of since the lockdowns, they now want those removed because they don't want the wild swimming spots anymore, because they're not local wild swimming spots anymore. They're now kind of on websites, and people come from all over the place, and it's
as long as they get rid of the weir, I don't mind the rationale, as long as it's gone.
Yeah, any excuse, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I suppose I'll probably not explain very well why it's a problem, but obviously, like, it blocks fish migration. But even sometimes if fish can get up, they expend an extraordinary amount of energy, which they wouldn't have extended anyway, and then they're in poorer condition to breed and perhaps more vulnerable to predation or other environmental stresses, which if that weir wasn't there, they just go straight up and crack on. So
absolutely, and it's also the impact it has on the habitat, and not just that it impounds the river upstream and makes that very slow. And we talked about why uniform channels are bad, but they essentially also they lock the riverbed in stasis. If you want to understand how rivers work, forget about the water. Rivers as a habitat is a flowing, shifting, changing conveyor belt of sediment, and the water is just the lubricant that moves it along. And if you put something in that blocks that sediment, then actually pools and riffles stop forming. The river doesn't have the same processes. It stops meandering as much. It kind of just it's everything slows down and becomes suppressed, and actually you get less habitat forming. So even if you get really small structures that are passable to fish, it's still worth taking them out.
Yeah, fish ladders aren't always the answer. I mean, I know they're better than nothing, don't get me wrong. Like, if you can't remove the weir, get a fish ladder in. But
option A is remove it, option B is remove it, option C is remove it, option E is to bypass it, and option D is to build a fish pass.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I know, again, like a lot of historical fish passes are designed specifically for salmon. And I hate the word migratory fish, because all fish are migratory fish. A roach migrates, a chub migrates, and a lot of these fish passes, while salmon might be able to get up them, lamprey might struggle, or eels might struggle, or other fish might struggle. So I think more recently, particularly like Unlocking the Seven and some of those projects, they've switched on to this a bit more, and they're a bit more accessible. But a lot of these historical fish passes, they're really a salmon pass. They're not actually a fish pass. Like, they're only going to let those up easily.
Yeah, and you'll
Yeah.
get and you may get some salmon, and other fish getting up through them, but yeah, we're quite good at monitoring how well fish get past things, but we're terrible at monitoring how many of them don't.
Mm.
So you have all these kind of barriers. You say, well, that's passable. Fish got past it. You're like, well, how many didn't? How many got, tried and failed and turned around? Or how many were so delayed they didn't make it where they needed to be in time to spawn? It's not as simple as can a fish get past it. It's much more complicated
No,
question.
that's a really good point. I never even thought of that, Mike. That's a really good point because I've put cameras below weirs before on the Trent, and it's almost like a queue of salmon, and you don't see that many jumping, but you think bloody hell, there's a lot there. So how many just think, oh, stuff this, we can't do it, or give up. So I never thought
Yeah,
of
and
that.
they're a species. They selectively pair. They're not arriving and they're not spawning like sort of shellfish do. They're not just sort of throwing DNA at each other and hoping it
Mm.
sticks. They actually do pair up. There's some complicated things at play, and so if they don't all arrive at the same time, then you're interfering with what should be a natural selection process. So if we delay them, even if they've got really quite passable structures, but you've got a number of them, then that's kind of, it spreads it all out. It's like sort of spreading out your traffic through, taking a motorway down to a single lane. Then
Yeah.
actually they're not all arriving at the same time, and that can have big impacts.
Because I suppose with salmon, historically, we would have seen hundreds, if not thousands, in rivers, and we're sort of got shifting baseline syndrome now. Where, I mean, in the UK, if you see like a half a dozen salmon, that's impressive now, isn't it? Or people get quite excited about that. Whereas I was in Alaska earlier this year, and the river, rivers the same size as a chalk stream were black with Pacific salmon. I know there are different species, but I like to think, I don't know if there's any historical or literal evidence of this, but our rivers would have been like that. So when you say these fish are pair spawning, I guess historically, because there were so many fish, it wouldn't have been a big risk. Whereas now, because of all these different factors, it becomes more of a risk that they might not find a partner, which is quite depressing, really.
Yeah, and it becomes a really desperate numbers game. And this is the thing. If your spawning habitat can take 500 pairs of salmon, so 1,000 salmon, that's all the spawning habitat you've got for. And every year you get enough fish up there to fill that keeps the population at the level that it essentially at its carrying capacity. But then if one year you come back and you have less than 500 pairs of salmon, then not all of that spawning habitat gets occupied, does it? And less, and actually, and it becomes sort of the situation where, okay, what's the number of pairs of salmon you need to actually just keep a population going? And if you've got weirs on a system, and even if they're let's say they're 50% of salmon get over them, how many do you need on that system before you don't get enough fish? You might have enough fish coming in at the bottom of the river to fill the spawning needs and keep the population going, but how many of those barriers does it take if a certain percentage aren't getting past each one before they get to the top and there aren't enough fish to spawn to actually keep the population perpetuating? So it's one of those things that, we still don't really understand what's happened to our salmon populations fully. And, the ultimate solution is to get our heads around that and correct it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, it's made weir removal that much more important, because it's sort of almost a case of actually it's now more important to remove weirs than it is to figure out what's actually happened. Because if we don't, we might figure out what happened to the salmon that went extinct. It's more important we stop them going, from going extinct. And on the chalk streams, we've actually got a genetically unique subgroup of salmon that are.
I saw this.
Yeah. So if you kind of go slightly west in sort of Devon and Cornwall, a bit further along, the south coast of the east, those salmon are actually more related to each other and the Chalkstream salmon are more related to salmon in France and Spain. Not entirely sure why that is. And they might well be going to different places. So they might actually, when they go out to sea, might be, rather than go up to the North Sea, they might be heading off towards Greenland or something like that.
Oh wow, yeah. So different they think that's a subspecies, do they, or not quite?
Well, I definitely a genetic subgroup.
Yeah,
Whether it's full subspecies is you're probably diving into a level of genetics understanding that I don't have.
Okay, all right. I won't push then. That's fair enough. So what sort of species thrive on chalk streams then? I mean, I guess everything when a chalk stream's working does well, but are there any species where chalk streams are sort of like a lifeline for them? Or is it pretty much everything?
Good question. I think rather
there's no endemics, is there, as far as I'm aware, or anything like that?
There's nothing I point to and say that's only on chalk streams. I mean, there may well be, like with the salmon. There's probably you could do the same with invertebrates. If you really dug down into the genetics, you'd probably find that there are kind of subspecies or groups because they're living in an environment that's so different that it's inevitable when you've got an environment that's so different to other neighboring environments that it's going to result in species that are particularly well adapted to it. But I think the main thing with chalk streams is the abundance and diversity of life. When you've got this kind of and a chalk stream in a really good condition, it really is like an aquarium. Unfortunately, we don't have many amazing examples of chalk streams these days, but there are still some around you can go and see, and it's absolutely staggering. You are looking into something that just looks impossible. It's that crystal clear, and there's just so much life going on. When you've got that diversity and abundance of plant life, you've got all the invertebrates that are living on and amongst all those plants that themselves are, because it's chalk water, it's rich in calcium carbonate. They build their carapaces, their bodies out of that, so it's really easy for them to grow and proliferate. And then you've got a really high abundance of fish and coming in to eat that, and birds, and then mammals, and the whole ecosystem kind of from the very base is just huge, and so it builds up into a big kind of tower, if you like.
That makes sense.
I think that's the thing that makes them special ecologically, rather than any particular sort of species you want to pinpoint.
I couldn't think of one myself, so that's why I was asking the question. But no, that makes a lot of sense. And before we go, this might be an impossible task for you, but have you got a favorite chalk stream? Or is that going to get you the sack if you favour one chalk stream over another?
I'm sure you're supposed to say the test. I normally tell people that's my least favourite chalk stream. Some parts of it, particularly in the sort of middle reaches, are absolutely terrible because they've just been so badly damaged. But I would say that there are parts of all the chalk streams I've visited, and I used to do, back in my Wild Trout Trust days, lots of work in the southeast on some of the Chilterns chalk streams as well. And every chalk stream has little reaches that are just incredible, and probably some really ghastly bits as well. So I could probably come up with a list of some of my favourite parts of chalk streams, but I don't think there's one that actually is in good enough condition to sort of take the crown. And I think anyone that says this chalk stream or that chalk stream is the best chalk stream probably hasn't seen it all.
No, it makes a lot of, it's sort of a sad but sobering statement, isn't it? It
is. I mean, the good thing about the work that we do is that we're slowly but steadily creating more chalk stream that is in really good condition, where we know there's really, they're healthy and things are growing and all the habitats there. And it doesn't, the sort of restoration work we do is, it's very habitat focused. It's not necessarily focusing on abstraction and water quality. But there are three legs to the bar stool of river health.
Yeah.
And actually, two of those legs require a lot of time. They almost certainly require top-down major political social changes, and one of them just requires some funding and people to roll their sleeves up and get in there and make a change. And so that's where we focus our energy, and we let our kind of friends in other organizations who are doing the amazing work either whisper in the right ears at Parliament or making a really loud noise on the telly. It all adds up to the same thing, which we hope is Chalkstreams that are still here for future generations.
No, and I think, power to you. I think that's the right thing. Do what you can, and if you can make a change, make a change. And it all helps towards the end of the day, doesn't it? If you can restructure some of these rivers and just make them look a little bit healthier, then do it, definitely. So I think it's fantastic what you do.
At the end of the day, I think the biggest cause of species loss on the planet is habitat loss.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And there are wider catchment scale impacts impacting all of our rivers, but on the Chalkstreams, the habitat loss was really violent and severe, and it's there because they can't repair themselves. We've got to put it back, and that's what we do.
Well, you could clear, let's say we've got a magic wand and we clear the water up tomorrow. If the animals haven't got anywhere to live or the wider habitat, then it's not going to work. So you've got to have that to help them. So I think, crack on and get on with it, Mike. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, and hopefully we'll get out on the bank at some point as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Thanks a lot, Jack.